I didn't expect to be the one giving an eyewitness account of humanity's most audacious middle finger to death itself. But here we are. The universe has a sixth sense of humor sometimes. My name isn't important. I'm just another soldier of the Terran Union, currently aboard the battlecruiser Primordius as we approach Feldara Station, a massive orbital construct belonging to the so-called Galactic Council. A pompous name for a collection of alien species who think writing rules on fancy paper makes them the cosmic police. Our mission was supposedly straightforward. Escort a special prisoner, a fellow elite Terran soldier, and hand him over for political reasons. At least that's what the official briefing said. Anyone with half a brain cell knew there was more to it. Approaching final docking sequence, announced the ship's AI. All escort personnel report to the hangar bay. I checked my sidearm, standard protocol, though using it would probably trigger an interstellar incident. Not that we humans particularly cared about those anymore. When you've cracked the code of death itself, diplomatic concerns take a back seat. See, that's the thing most aliens don't understand about us. Terrans developed what we casually call the respawn system about 30 years ago. Die in battle? No problem. Your consciousness gets uploaded to a new body. The tech isn't perfect. There's still a recovery period, and nobody's quite sure what happens after too many resets, but it changed everything. The aliens hate it. Say we're violating cosmic order, or some spiritual bullshit. I think they're just jealous we figured it out first. Commander Blake approached as I was adjusting my uniform. Tall, scarred across her right cheek, and with eyes that had seen more resets than anyone should endure. Listen carefully, she said, voice low enough that only I could hear. If things get tense down there, if they try anything with our man, you flip the switch. Understood. I nodded, feeling the weight of the small device she slipped into my palm. What exactly am I triggering? I asked. She gave me that trademark half smile. Insurance. That's all you need to know. As our shuttle detached from the Primordius, I caught sight of Feldara Station through the viewport. It was impressive. I'll give the aliens that, a massive ring structure encircled by smaller satellite platforms, all lit up like some cosmic Christmas ornament. The comms crackled with an incoming message. A being that identified itself as High Arbiter Zex Valerian of the Council spoke in that typical condescending tone all alien officials seem to practice in the mirror. Terran vessel, be advised that the proceedings have been altered. Your prisoner is not the only human in our custody. We have apprehended another Terran soldier, accused of war crimes on Nexus 7. Your presence is required at the public tribunal. Commander Blake's face remained impassive, but I caught the slight narrowing of her eyes. This wasn't part of the plan. Acknowledge, Feldara Control, she replied evenly. We will comply with the adjusted proceedings. When the transmission ended, she turned to me. Looks like there's been a complication. What war crimes on Nexus 7? I asked. We haven't had operations therein. It doesn't matter, she cut me off. The Council is playing games. Just remember what I told you about the switch. As our shuttle docked, I overheard whispers among the station's maintenance crew, a mix of Voxari and Nathal workers. They kept their distance from us humans, but I caught fragments about the Reaper and foolish humans meddling with death. Superstitious nonsense, I thought at the time. Boy, was I wrong. The Grand Hall of Feldara Station was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, atmospheric lighting that cast everything in a blue-green glow, and a circular arrangement that put whoever stood in the center at the mercy of observers from all sides. Classic power play architecture. Our small group of Terran soldiers marched in formation, with me slightly behind Commander Blake. The place was packed with representatives of various species, the long-necked Sophrixi, the crystalline Vox, the amorphous shade collective entities contained in their environment suits. At the center of the hall stood a raised platform with a strange apparatus I'd never seen before, a circular array of floating metallic rings surrounding what looked like a large opal gem that pulsed with inner light. That's the Trans-Invocation Matrix, whispered the soldier next to me. The children of the ancients use it for their soul reading ceremonies. Soul reading? I snorted. What kind of medieval crap is that? Shut it, hissed Commander Blake. Show some respect, at least outwardly. The children of the ancients, a religious sect composed of various species who believed they were descended from the first sentient race in the galaxy, were already there, dressed in their ceremonial robes. They looked like cosmic monks with those ridiculous hoods and glowing rune patterns sewn into the fabric. And then I saw him, the captured Terran soldier they'd mentioned. He stood in a containment field, but contrary to what you'd expect from a prisoner, his posture was relaxed, almost cocky, like he was exactly where he wanted to be. High Arbiter Zex Valerian, a tall Sophrixi with iridescent scales and 4 arms, stepped forward. Representatives of the Terran Union, the voice boomed across the hall. You stand witness today to a proceeding of grave consequence. The human known as Lieutenant Alexei Varnin stands accused of violating the 7th Accords by deploying prohibited weaponry on Nexus 7, resulting in the annihilation of 3,000 sentient beings. Murmurs rippled through the assembled aliens. I glanced at Commander Blake, who remained stone-faced, then back at our supposed war criminal. Lieutenant Varnin actually smiled. The crime is further compounded, continued Zex Valerian, by the accused utilization of your respawn technology to evade final judgment multiple times. Such evasion of cosmic law cannot stand. That's when I stepped forward, unable to contain myself. With all due respect, High Arbiter, what evidence supports these accusations? Under Galactic Treaty, the accused has rights to silence. The Arbiter's scales flashed red with anger. The human mockery of death itself is evidence enough of your kind's disregard for cosmic order. But if it's evidence you demand, the Arbiter gestured to the children of the ancients. We shall employ methods beyond your comprehension. The Trans-Invocation Matrix will reveal the true nature of this human soul and the atrocities it has committed. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Fortunately, my helmet visor hid this disrespect. All this talk of souls and cosmic order sounded like mystical nonsense compared to the hard science that had allowed us to conquer death. The children began some kind of ritual, moving around the apparatus while chanting in a language that seemed to shift and change with each syllable. The central gem pulsed brighter, and I felt a strange sensation crawl up my spine, like static electricity mixed with the feeling of being watched. This is ridiculous, I whispered to Commander Blake. Are we really going to stand here while they put on this light show? She didn't answer, but her hand moved subtly to her belt, where I knew she carried the same kind of switch she'd given me. The air in the chamber grew still, unnaturally so. The ambient hum of the station's systems seemed to fade away, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my eardrums. The floating rings of the Matrix began to spin faster, generating a low, pulsating tone that seemed to vibrate through my bones. Something was happening. Even through my skepticism, I could feel it, a tangible shift in the atmosphere, as if reality itself was being stretched thin. They're actually trying to summon something, muttered the soldier beside me. Holy shit. I laughed nervously. What, like a ghost? Give me a break. This is just advanced tech designed to look mystical. Classic intimidation tactics. But as the words left my mouth, the central gem of the Matrix shattered, not into fragments, but into a cloud of luminescent particles that hung in the air before coalescing into a dark, swirling vortex. The temperature in the room plummeted so rapidly that frost formed on my visor. The children of the ancients backed away, their chanting replaced by panicked murmurs. This clearly wasn't part of the program. And then, from the heart of the vortex, a figure emerged, tall, shrouded in darkness deeper than the void between stars. It wore what looked like a tattered black cloak that moved as if caught in an unfelt wind. And in one skeletal hand, it clutched a curved blade that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Reaper had arrived. A voice that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly into my mind echoed through the chamber. Who dare summon me? The Grand Hall of Feldara Station fell into absolute silence. You could have heard a micropin drop on the polished floor. Every alien species present, the Sophrixi, the Vox, the Shade Collective, even the Stoic Cronians, collectively took several steps back from the center of the room. All except 2 humans, Lieutenant Varnin in his containment field, and me, frozen in place not by fear, though fear was certainly present, but by morbid fascination. The Reaper, because what else could you call this entity, hovered slightly above the platform where the trans-invocation matrix had been. Up close, I could see that what I'd taken for a cloak was more like a piece of reality torn away, revealing something beneath that hurt to look at directly. The skeletal hand gripping the scythe seemed to shift between bone, shadow, and something else entirely, depending on how you focus your eyes. Where a face should have been beneath the hood, there was only deepest darkness, punctuated by 2 points of cold blue light. High Arbiter Zex Valerian had fallen to his knees, all 4 arms raised in supplication. Great Harvester of Souls, the Arbiter's voice trembled. Forgive us. The ritual was merely meant to reveal truth, not to summon your august presence. The Reaper's gaze, if you could call it that, swept across the assembled aliens before settling on Lieutenant Varnin. Truth. The word echoed like distant thunder. You speak of truth while harboring these? The contempt in that final word made my skin crawl. The Reaper floated toward the containment field holding Varnin, who, to my amazement, maintained his composure. In fact, the lieutenant was smiling, a tight, knowing smile that suddenly made me very nervous. Humanity. The Reaper's voice resonated through the chamber. The species that believes it can cheat me. Lieutenant Varnin actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that caused several of the children of the ancients to gasp in horror. We're not cheating, Varnin replied casually. We're evolving. Death is just another natural force to be understood and harnessed, like electricity or gravity. I watched in disbelief as this man bantered with what appeared to be the anthropomorphic personification of death itself. My hand instinctively moved to the switch Commander Blake had given me, though I had no idea what it would actually do. The Reaper moved closer to the containment field, then passed through it as if it weren't there. Now face to hood with Varnin, the entity raised its scythe. Your species has disrupted the cosmic balance with your respawn technology, it hissed. Each time you return, you tear the fabric between realms. Each time you cheat the final transition, you create ripples that threaten all existence. Commander Blake stepped forward then. If that's true, why haven't you intervened before now? We've been using this technology for 3 decades. The Reaper's attention shifted to her, and I could feel the temperature drop further. I am bound by laws beyond your comprehension, it said. But your arrogance has grown too great. The soul of this 1 inch, it gestured to Varnin, has evaded me 7 times. 7. Each time returning with less of what made it human. Each time carrying fragments of the realm between. That statement hit me like a physical blow. We'd always speculated about the consequences of multiple respawns, but this was the first confirmation I'd heard that something fundamental might be lost in the process. Varnin's smile never faltered. And yet here I stand, ready for round 8, if necessary. The Reaper's response was chilling. You think this is a game? You believe your technology makes you immortal? Everything has a price. The bill comes due for all, eventually. From my position, I could see that Varnin was slowly moving his right hand towards something concealed at his waist. The aliens were too focused on the confrontation to notice, and the Reaper seemed occupied with delivering its cosmic warning. Perhaps, Varnin replied, but in the meantime, we'll keep living on our terms. That's when everything went sideways. Lieutenant Varnin pulled out a small device, similar to the switch I carried but larger, with blinking lights along its surface. The containment field around him flickered and died, apparently shorted out by something embedded in his uniform. This, he announced, holding up the device for all to see, is what we call a dead man's switch. Currently, my thumb is the only thing preventing it from activating. And what it activates, dear friends, is a quantum displacement bomb capable of reducing this entire station and anything within 50,000 kilometers to elementary particles. Panic erupted among the assembled aliens. The High Arbiter began shouting orders to security forces, but they seemed reluctant to approach a human holding what amounted to a doomsday device. Commander Blake moved swiftly to Varnin's side, confirming my suspicion that this had been the plan all along. The prisoner transfer was just a cover. The Reaper, surprisingly, showed no reaction to the threat, at least none that I could discern from its featureless face. "You would destroy yourselves along with this station?" it asked, sounding almost curious. Varnon shrugged. "We'd respawn. Most of the species here wouldn't, and thus prove every accusation they have leveled against your kind." "Sometimes," Varnon said, "making a point requires a dramatic demonstration." I stood frozen, mind racing. This was far beyond a diplomatic incident. This was potential genocide. My hand gripped the switch Commander Blake had given me, and suddenly I understood. It wasn't an insurance policy, it was an escape plan. Probably a targeted teleportation device to get us clear before. A commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Our second prisoner, the one we'd originally come to retrieve, had broken free of his escorts and was running toward us. Blood of various colors stained his uniform where he'd apparently fought his way loose. "It's done," he shouted. "The packages are placed." Packages. Bombs. This wasn't just about threatening the station. They'd already planted explosives throughout Feldara. The Reaper turned its gaze upon me then, and in that moment, I felt stripped bare as if those points of blue light were peering directly into whatever humans called a soul. "And you," it said, so quietly that I thought at first I was imagining it. "What role do you play in this farce?" Before I could answer, Varnon shouted, "Enough talk," and lifted the dead man's switch high. "The Terran Union will not be dictated to by aliens or cosmic entities. We make our own destiny." And then, with a smile that will haunt me until my final death, Lieutenant Alexei Varnon released his thumb from the switch. The last thing I saw was a blinding flash of light, the Reaper's cloak spreading like wings of darkness across my field of vision, and Commander Blake activating her own device. Then came a sensation of being torn apart at the molecular level, a pain so absolute it transcended physical feeling into something almost spiritual. And darkness. I came back to consciousness slowly, the way you might surface from a deep water dive, pressure gradually releasing, reality reassembling itself around me piece by piece. The sterile white ceiling of a medical bay greeted me, along with the quiet beeping of monitoring equipment. "Welcome back to the land of the living," said a voice to my right. Again, I turned my head, an action that required far more effort than it should have, to see a medical officer in Terran uniform checking my vitals. Her nameplate read Dr. Kessler. "What happened?" My voice came out as a rasp. "The station. Feldura." Dr. Kessler's expression tightened. "Gone. Completely destroyed, along with 3 Council battlecruisers and most of their diplomatic fleet." The memory of blinding light flooded back, along with the haunting image of the Reaper's cloak spreading across my vision. "How did I survive?" I asked. "Did Commander Blake switch?" "It wasn't a teleporter, if that's what you're thinking," Kessler said, checking something on my chart. "It was an emergency neural uplink. Transmitted your consciousness back to the primordial respawn system the instant your body detected fatal trauma." She paused. "You've been reset. This is a new body." I stared at my hands, which looked identical to my previous ones, but felt different somehow. Newer, like a freshly laundered uniform versus one you've worn for months. "And the others?" "Commander Blake?" "Varnon." "The commander made it back the same way you did." Varnon was too close to the blast epicenter. His neural patterns were too scrambled for recovery. "He's gone. Permanently." I tried to process this information. Varnon had gambled on resetting after triggering the bomb, but something had gone wrong. Perhaps the Reaper had something to do with that. "What about what that thing said?" I asked. "About the respawn technology tearing at the fabric of reality?" Dr. Kessler's face hardened. "That's classified information not to be discussed, even among personnel with clearance. The official position is that the entity was employing psychological warfare tactics." But I'd seen the look in her eyes. She knew something, or at least suspected something, about the consequences of our technology. "How bad is it out there?" I changed the subject. "Politically, I mean. About what you'd expect. Half the Galactic Council is dead. The other half is screaming for human blood or begging for peace treaties depending on how close they were to Feldara when it blew. She checked my pupil response with a penlight. The Terran High Command has issued a statement condemning Varnin as a rogue agent while quietly mobilizing the 4th and 7th Fleets. Classic human strategy. Deny responsibility while preparing for full-scale war. The children of the ancients have gone dark, Kessler continued. Disappeared from all their temples and outposts across known space. Some think they're performing mass suicides as penance for summoning the Reaper. I close my eyes, suddenly exhausted despite having just woken up. And what about it, the Reaper? There was a long pause before Kessler answered. There have been reports, unconfirmed of course, of crew members across multiple ships glimpsing a dark figure in corridors and empty rooms. Maintenance logs show temperature drops that can't be explained by system malfunctions. She lowered her voice. And the respawn success rate has dropped 12% since the Feldar incident. I let that sink in. 12% more permanent deaths. Get some rest, Dr. Kessler said, patting my shoulder. You're scheduled for debriefing in 6 hours. After she left, I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had we just triggered an interstellar war? Had we actually pissed off death itself? And then, in the darkened corner of my recovery room, I saw it. A deeper shadow within the shadows, and 2 points of cold blue light. I am still waiting, whispered a voice that bypassed my ears and spoke directly to my mind. When I blinked, it was gone. But the chill remained, crawling along my spine and settling somewhere deep in what I supposed must be my brand new soul. The debriefing took place in a secure chamber aboard the Primordius, which had retreated to the Tau Ceti system, safely within Terran-controlled space. Around a large table sat the ship's captain, 2 intelligence officers, Commander Blake, looking remarkably unscathed in her fresh body, and Admiral Harkness, who had arrived via faster-than-light transport as soon as news of the Feldara incident reached Terran High Command. I gave my account of events as precisely as I could, from the initial contact with Feldara Station to the appearance of the Reaper and the detonation of Varnin's quantum displacement bomb. I mentioned the entity's claims about our respawn technology damaging the fabric of reality, but carefully noted that this could have been psychological manipulation. Throughout my report, Admiral Harkness remained impassive, his weathered face betraying nothing. When I finished, he leaned forward, hands clasped before him. Your account matches Commander Blake's in all essential details, he said, including the appearance of this entity. The question now is how we proceed. Captain Reynolds, the Primordius commanding officer, shifted uncomfortably. Sir, with respect, we've effectively declared war on the Galactic Council. Feldara Station wasn't just a diplomatic hub. It was their symbolic seat of power. They declared war first. Commander Blake cut in sharply. The moment they detained Lieutenant Varnin on trumped-up charges and attempted to put humanity on trial. Admiral Harkness raised a hand, silencing further debate. What's done is done. Our concern now is managing the fallout. He turned to one of the intelligence officers. Report. The officer, a thin woman with cybernetic implants visible at her temples, pulled up a holographic display. 17 species have severed all diplomatic ties with the Terran Union. 3. The Sophrixi, the Cronians, and the Shade Collective have declared a state of war. However, 6 formerly neutral systems have reached out with offers of alliance, apparently believing that our demonstration at Feldara proves we're the winning side to back. And the others? Admiral Harkness prompted. 22 species have sued for peace, including several we've had border disputes with for decades. They're practically falling over themselves to offer concessions. I found myself staring at the holographic display, watching as entire civilizations realign themselves in the wake of our actions. This was why Varnin had done it, I realized. Not just as an escape plan, but as a calculated show of force that would reshape the galactic political landscape. What about the respawn issue? Captain Reynolds asked, voicing the question I'd been afraid to raise. If what this Reaper said has any truth to it, that information remains classified at the highest level, Admiral Harkness interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. What I can say is that our scientists are investigating certain anomalies in the system. Until their research is complete, all personnel are advised to take extra precautions in combat situations. In other words, don't count on respawning if you die. And what about the entity itself? I found myself asking, has there been any further contact or sightings? A heavy silence fell over the room. The intelligence officer with the cybernetic implants looked to Admiral Harkness, who gave a slight nod. 37 confirmed sightings across 22 different vessels and installations, she reported, plus hundreds of unconfirmed reports. Analysis suggests the incidents are concentrated around individuals who have undergone multiple respawn procedures. Like me, like Commander Blake. We'd cheated death, and now death was taking a personal interest. I saw it, I admitted, in my recovery room after I respawned. It said it was still waiting. Commander Blake's expression hardened, but she nodded. I've seen it too. 3 times now, always just for a moment, and always with that same sense of anticipation. Admiral Harkness stood up abruptly. This information doesn't leave this room. The last thing we need is panic spreading through the ranks about some supernatural boogeyman coming for resurrected soldiers. With all due respect, sir, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. If this entity is real, and I believe it is, shouldn't we be trying to understand what it wants? Maybe even negotiate? The Admiral's laugh was cold and without humor. Negotiate with death? That's a new one. He shook his head. No, we do what humans have always done. We adapt, we overcome, and we move forward. If this Reaper has an issue with our technology, that's its problem, not ours. Classic human arrogance. We've just been shown irrefutable evidence of a cosmic force beyond our understanding, and our response was essentially, screw you, we do what we want. The meeting concluded with instructions for all personnel to maintain silence about the Reaper and to report any unusual phenomena directly to intelligence officers. As we prepared to leave, Admiral Harkness held me back. Your service record indicates this was your first respawn, he said once we were alone. I nodded. Yes, sir. Then a word of advice. The first one's the hardest, psychologically speaking. There's an adjustment period where things might seem off, different. That's normal. What's not normal is obsessing over metaphysical entities or cosmic consequences. His eyes bored into mine. Focus on your duty, soldier. Leave the philosophical questions to the eggheads in research division. Yes, sir. I replied automatically, though internally I was far from reassured. As I made my way back to my quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The corridors of the Primordius seemed darker than normal, the shadows deeper, the ambient temperature just a few degrees colder than ship regulations specified. And when I finally reached my room and the door slid shut behind me, I found myself reluctant to turn around, certain that if I did, I would see 2 points of cold blue light staring back at me from the darkness. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bunk, staring at my hands. New hands that had never fired a weapon or thrown a punch, attached to a body that had never known combat but contained a mind that remembered dying. What do you want? I whispered to the empty room. No answer came, but I hadn't really expected one. Whatever game the Reaper was playing, it clearly operated on a timescale beyond human understanding. It could afford to be patient. Unfortunately for it, so could we, especially now that we had found a way to extend our lives indefinitely. Or so I told myself as I lay down to sleep. Tried to ignore the persistent chill that no amount of thermal regulation seemed able to dispel. 3 days after the debriefing, we received the first official surrender. The Talaxian Confederacy, a mid-tier power with territories adjacent to human space, transmitted a formal declaration of submission to any and all terms the Terran Union might impose. They were quickly followed by the Meraxi Combine, the hegemony of Alex, and 4 other species that had previously aligned themselves with the Galactic Council. Systems that had been contested for generations were suddenly being offered to humanity without conditions. It was, as one of my fellow officers put it, the greatest diplomatic victory in human history, achieved through what amounted to an act of terrorism on a cosmic scale. I was present on the bridge when Captain Reynolds received the transmission from Terran High Command authorizing the Primordius to proceed to the Talaxian homeworld and accept their formal surrender in person. The mood among the crew was jubilant, triumphant even. All I could think about was the Reaper's words. Everything has a price. The bill comes due for all, eventually. As if reading my thoughts, Commander Blake appeared at my side. "You look troubled for someone on the winning team," she remarked. "Are we winning?" I asked quietly. "Or just postponing the inevitable?" She studied me for a moment, then gestured for me to follow her to a more private corner of the bridge. "You're still thinking about the entity," she said. It wasn't a question. "Aren't you? You said yourself you've seen it 3 times. Blake's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "4 times now. Last night, standing at the foot of my bed." She lowered her voice further. It spoke again, said that the tally grows. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. "What do you think it means?" "I think," she said carefully, "that our respawn technology has consequences we don't fully understand yet. But I also think that's true of most major technological leaps. The first humans to split the atom didn't fully grasp what they were unleashing either. They weren't antagonizing a fundamental cosmic force," I pointed out. Blake actually smiled at that. "How do you know? Maybe death has always resented humanity's efforts to extend our lifespans. From the first medicine man who saved a tribal elder to the genetic therapies that pushed human longevity past 150 years, we've been giving the middle finger to mortality since we climbed down from the trees." It was an interesting perspective, but not an entirely reassuring one. "So what do we do? Ignore it and hope it goes away?" "Of course not," she replied. "We study it. We understand it. And then we beat it, just like we've beaten every other challenge our species has faced." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "That's what makes us human. We don't accept limitations, even when they come in the form of cosmic entities with scythes." Our conversation was interrupted by Captain Reynolds calling the bridge to attention. "Prepare for FDL jump to the Talaxian system," he ordered. "All personnel to jump stations." As the ship's engines hummed with building power, I took my position at the tactical console, wondering if Blake was right. Was this just another obstacle for humanity to overcome? Or had we finally overreached, challenging forces beyond our comprehension? The jump sequence initiated, reality distorted around the Primordius, and for a split second, just before we translated into faster-than-light travel, I thought I glimpsed a familiar darkness spreading at the edges of my vision and 2 points of cold blue light watching from the void between stars. Then we were through, emerging into the Talaxian system in a flash of exotic particles, the moment forgotten as duty took over. The surrender ceremony on Talaxis Prime was elaborate, clearly planned to appease what the Talaxians believed to be humanity's appetite for grandeur. Their High Chancellor, a tall, avian being with iridescent plumage, presented Captain Reynolds with their world's ceremonial surrender staff, a tradition dating back thousands of years in their culture. The Talaxian people recognized the supremacy of the Terran Union. The High Chancellor announced in the Grand Amphitheater, voice amplified for the benefit of both the assembled alien dignitaries and the human delegation. "We offer our unconditional surrender and pledge our resources, territories, and loyalty to humanity's vision for the galaxy." Captain Reynolds accepted the staff with appropriate solemnity, following the script provided by Terran Diplomatic Corps. "The Terran Union acknowledges your surrender and welcomes the Talaxian people as autonomous subjects under our protection." Autonomous subjects, a pretty euphemism for what amounted to vassalage. Throughout the ceremony, I scanned the crowds and shadows, half expecting to see a dark figure with glowing blue eyes. But the Reaper, it seemed, did not concern itself with the political machinations of mortals. Or perhaps it was simply biding its time. After the formalities concluded, there was a reception where Talaxian elites mingled nervously with human officers, trying to curry favor with their new overlords. I found the whole display distasteful and was about to make an excuse to return to the ship when a Talaxian female approached me. "You were there," she said without preamble, her voice a melodic trill that the translator rendered in slightly flat tones. At Feldura, you saw the Eternal Harvester. I tensed, glancing around to ensure no other humans were within earshot. I don't know what you're talking about. Please, she insisted, her feathered crest flattening in what I recognized as a sign of deference. I am Nairi Talon, High Seer of the Seventh Feather. My order has studied the boundaries between life and death for millennia. Then you should know better than to discuss such things at a diplomatic function, I replied, attempting to move past her. She placed a slender, three-fingered hand on my arm. The Eternal Harvester does not forget, human. It does not forgive. What your kind has done, cheating death itself, has consequences beyond your understanding. So I've been told, I said dryly. You mock because you do not comprehend, she continued, undeterred. Each time you respawn, as you call it, a piece remains behind, a fragment of soul that cannot be reconstructed. Over time, those who have died many times become less, and those fragments, they accumulate, they resonate, they call to the harvester. Despite myself, I was intrigued. What exactly are you suggesting? Nairi Talon's large, amber eyes darted around the reception hall before she leaned in closer. Your respawn technology doesn't just reconstruct bodies and transfer consciousness. It tears holes in the veil between life and death. Each hole weakens the barrier. If the barrier falls completely, she made a fluttering gesture with her hands that needed no translation. Catastrophe. That sounds like superstition, I said, though without much conviction. Does it? She countered. You saw the harvester with your own eyes. Did that feel like superstition? I had no good answer for that. The memory of those cold blue lights still haunted me. There are records in our ancient texts, Nairi Talon continued, of a time when the barrier was breached before on a single world in the far reaches of the galaxy. That world is now what you humans call the Obsidian Void, a region of space where no light shines, no life exists, and ships that enter never return. A chill ran down my spine. The Obsidian Void was well known among spacefarers, a bizarre astronomical phenomenon that defied scientific explanation. A perfect sphere of absolute nothingness, roughly the size of a planetary system, that appeared on sensors as a complete absence of everything, even background radiation. The Harvester is not your enemy, Nairi Talon said, her voice dropping even lower. It is merely the caretaker of cosmic balance. But there are things beyond the barrier, things that were never meant to interact with our reality. If the veil thins too much. She was interrupted by Commander Blake, who appeared at my side with suspicious timing. Making friends with the locals? Blake asked, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp as they assessed the Talaxian. High Seer Nairi Talon was just sharing some of her people's cultural beliefs. I replied carefully. Fascinating, I'm sure, Blake said dismissively. But we're being recalled to the ship. Captain's orders. As she led me away, I glanced back to see Nairi Talon watching us with an expression that, despite her alien features, I could only interpret as profound sadness. What was she really telling you? Blake asked once we were out of earshot. I considered lying, but decided against it. She believes our respawn technology is damaging the barrier between life and death, creating holes that might let something through. To my surprise, Blake didn't dismiss the idea outright. Interesting theory, not unlike what our own research division has been investigating. What? I stopped walking. You know something about this? Blake looked around, then pulled me into an empty side corridor. This is level 10 classified, understand? But since you've already encountered the entity and heard the Talaxian's theories, she activated her wrist computer, entered a complex authorization code, and projected a small hologram between us. It showed a graph with a steadily rising line. This is the measurement of what our scientists call quantum resonance disruption in areas where multiple respawn procedures have been performed, she explained. In simple terms, the fabric of reality is becoming increasingly unstable around our respawn facilities. I stared at the graph, which showed a sharp uptick in the last few days since the Feldara incident. And this is leading to what, exactly? Blake deactivated the hologram. We're not sure yet. Increased sightings of the entity, certainly. Decreased respawn success rates. Strange phenomena in and around respawn centers. Time distortions. Unexplained energy signatures. Temporary localized breakdowns in the laws of physics. Jesus, I muttered. And High Command is just ignoring this. Not ignoring, Blake corrected. Investigating. But we're not about to abandon our greatest strategic advantage because of some unexplained phenomena and a scary cosmic entity. Even if that entity is death itself. I challenged. Blake's expression hardened. Especially then, humanity has spent its entire existence fighting against death. We're not going to stop now that we can actually see our enemy face to face. The Primordius returned to Earth a month later, hailed as the flagship of humanity's new galactic order. In the wake of the Feldara incident, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. 3/4 of the former Galactic Council species had either surrendered to the Terran Union or declared neutrality with favorable trade terms. The remaining quarter, led by the Sophrixi, had formed a resistance alliance, but their military capabilities were stretched thin across too many fronts. For all intents and purposes, humanity had won. I stood at the viewport in my quarters, watching as we approached Earth orbit. The blue-green jewel of our homeworld looked exactly as it always had. Peaceful, beautiful, untouched by the cosmic drama unfolding across the stars. How strange that the people down there could go about their daily lives, completely unaware that their military had effectively declared war on death itself. After a moment's contemplation, I corrected myself. Not completely unaware. Reports of respawn failures had begun to leak to the civilian population, though officially attributed to technical issues being addressed by our finest minds. And there were rumors, just rumors, so far, of strange sightings in hospitals, cemeteries, and areas surrounding military installations. The Reaper was making its presence known, not just to those who had cheated death, but to humanity as a whole. My reflection in the viewport glass looked tired, with dark circles under my eyes that hadn't been there before Feldara. I hadn't been sleeping well. Few of us had. Dreams of endless darkness punctuated by points of cold blue light had become common among the crew, especially those who had undergone respawn. Procedures. The ship's intercom broke into my thoughts. All officers report to Briefing Room 1 for planet-side transition instructions. I sighed, turning away from the view of Earth. One last briefing before we could disembark and take our hard-earned shore leave. I straightened my uniform and made my way down the corridor, nodding to fellow crew members as I passed. The briefing was standard procedure, reminders about security protocols, media talking points regarding our diplomatic mission to Talaxis Prime, no mention of coerced surrender, and schedules for debriefings with various military divisions. I was paying only half attention until Admiral Harkness, who had remained aboard to oversee our return, mentioned a new directive. All personnel who have undergone respawn procedures in the last 6 months are required to report to Medical Facility 7 in Geneva within 48 hours of planetfall, he announced. This is mandatory, no exceptions. You'll be receiving specialized medical and psychological evaluation. Murmurs spread through the assembled officers. Medical Facility 7 was known to specialize in respawn research and complications. Sir, one officer ventured, is this related to the reported decrease in respawn success rates? Admiral Harkness's expression remained carefully neutral. It's a standard precautionary measure following extended deployment. Nothing more. No one believed him, but no one dared press the issue further. After the briefing, as we filed out, I found myself walking beside Lieutenant Commander Reeves, our tactical officer who had respawned twice during previous deployments. Medical Facility 7, he muttered. That's where they send you when they think you're seeing ghosts. Have you? I asked quietly. Seen anything unusual since your respawns? Reeves gave me a sidelong glance. Ask me again when we're planet-side and not surrounded by recording devices, he replied, tapping his ears subtly to indicate the ship's surveillance systems. High Command was clearly taking the situation seriously enough to monitor conversations about it. That was concerning. Disembarkation proceeded smoothly the next morning. I watched from the shuttle as the massive form of the Primordius receded above us, a monument to human military power now orbiting its home planet like a protective sentinel. Geneva hadn't changed since I'd last seen it. The gleaming spires of the Terran Defense Headquarters rising above the carefully preserved old city, Lake Geneva sparkling in the autumn sunlight. It looked peaceful, permanent, unaffected by the cosmic forces we'd encountered light years away. I reported to Medical Facility 7 as ordered, expecting a sterile hospital environment. Instead, I found what appeared to be a fortified research installation disguised as a medical center. Armed guards at every entrance, security scans more intensive than standard military protocols, and staff with the tense, focused demeanor of people dealing with a crisis they weren't allowed to acknowledge publicly. After checking in, I was directed to a waiting area with about 24 other military personnel, all of whom had undergone respawn procedures recently. The room was unnaturally quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts, avoiding eye contact with others. Reeves was there, sitting alone in a corner. I moved to join him. "So," I said, keeping my voice low, "about that question I asked you on the ship." He glanced around, then shrugged slightly. "Everyone here has seen something," he replied quietly. "That's why we're here. They want to know what we've seen, how often, and whether it's affecting our performance." "Have you reported your experiences?" Reeves gave a harsh, short laugh. "First time, yes. Told my commanding officer about seeing a dark figure in my quarters. Was sent for psychological evaluation and told it was post-respawn stress syndrome. Second time, I kept my mouth shut. But now, they're specifically looking for these sightings I observed. Something's changed. Feldara changed everything," Reeves said. "Before, it was just individual reports that could be dismissed as hallucinations or stress. Now too many people have seen the same thing. It's becoming harder to ignore." Our conversation was interrupted as a medical technician called my name. I was led through a series of corridors to an examination room that looked more like an interrogation chamber, sparse, windowless, with a single chair facing a panel of monitoring equipment. Dr. Eliza Chun entered a few minutes later, carrying a tablet. She was middle-aged, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the sharp, assessing gaze of someone who had seen too much to be easily surprised. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair as she took a seat opposite me. "This isn't an interrogation, despite the room's appearance. We're simply collecting data on post-respawn experiences." I sat, noticing the subtle neural monitors embedded in the chair's headrest. "You're scanning my brain activity." Dr. Chin didn't bother denying it. "Yes. We found that certain patterns emerge when subjects recall encounters with the entity you witnessed at Feldara Station. So they were specifically looking for information about the Reaper." "Interesting. How many times have you seen the entity since your respawn?" she asked, getting straight to the point. 3 times, I admitted. Once in my recovery room immediately after respawning, once during FTL transit to the Talaxian system, and once in my quarters 2 weeks ago. She nodded, making notes. "Did it communicate with you on these occasions?" "Only the first time. It said it was still waiting." "And how would you describe your emotional state during these encounters?" I considered the question carefully. Not fear exactly, more like a profound sense of wrongness, as if I was seeing something my mind wasn't equipped to properly process. Dr. Chin nodded again. "That aligns with other reports. Now, I'd like to discuss any physical symptoms you've experienced since respawning. Any unexplained sensations, persistent temperature fluctuations, sensory anomalies." "I'm cold all the time," I said. "No matter the environmental controls, I feel a chill that seems to come from inside rather than outside." "Any dreams or sleep disturbances?" "Nightmares," I confirmed. "Always the same, floating in darkness with those blue lights watching me. Sometimes I hear whispers, but I can never make out the words." Dr. Chun made more notes, then set the tablet aside. "I'm going to show you a series of images. I'd like you to tell me if any of them resemble what you saw at Feldara." She activated a holographic projector, displaying various artistic representations of death entities from different cultures. The Grim Reaper of Western tradition, Anubis from ancient Egypt, the Hindu Yama, and others more alien, presumably from non-human civilizations. None captured the true essence of what I'd seen. It was less defined than these, I explained, like a tear in reality shaped vaguely like a humanoid figure. The only distinct features were the scythe and those blue lights where eyes would be. And did you feel it was specifically targeting you, or humanity in general? Both, I said after a moment's reflection. It seemed to have a personal interest in those who had respawned, but also a broader grievance against humanity for developing the technology in the first place. Dr. Chen leaned forward, lowering her voice slightly. I'm going to ask you something now that isn't part of the standard questionnaire. In your personal assessment, what do you believe this entity is? An alien life form? A technological phenomenon? A manifestation of collective human consciousness? Or something else entirely? I met her gaze steadily. I believe it's exactly what it appears to be. Death itself. Or, at least, the personification of a fundamental cosmic force that our respawn technology has directly challenged. She held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty. She picked up her tablet again. There's one more thing. We've been developing a potential countermeasure, a neural implant designed to shield respawn consciousness from external interference. The project is still experimental, but volunteers are being accepted for the first trial phase. A shield against the Reaper? I asked incredulously. That's one way of looking at it, Dr. Chen replied. Though officially, it's described as protection against post-respawn neural anomalies. I shook my head. With all due respect, Doctor, I don't think you can shield someone from death with a neural implant. Dr. Chen's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of something, agreement, perhaps, in her eyes. I understand your skepticism, she said, but we have to try something. The frequency of entity encounters is increasing exponentially, and the respawn success rate continues to decline. Some of our scientists believe we've reached a tipping point. Meaning what exactly? She hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Meaning that if current trends continue, the barrier between life and death, whatever that truly is in scientific terms, could experience a catastrophic failure within the next 6 months. The words of the Talaxian seer, Narrated, echoed in my mind. If the barrier falls completely. Catastrophe. What happens then? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. We don't know for certain, Dr. Chen admitted, but theoretical models suggest a scenario similar to the obsidian void phenomenon, potentially on a much larger scale. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. And High Command still won't consider suspending the respawn program? That's not my department, she replied diplomatically. My job is to find a solution that allows us to maintain our technological advantage while mitigating the side effects, politics, and military strategy trumping existential risk. Typical human thinking. The same thinking that had gotten us into this mess in the first place. I'll consider the implant program, I said, though I had no intention of volunteering. Something told me that attempting to shield oneself from the Reaper would only attract its attention more intensely. Dr. Chen seemed to sense my reluctance. Think about it. In the meantime, you're on mandatory leave for 2 weeks. No duties, no deployments. Get some rest. Reconnect with friends or family if you can. As I left the medical facility, I wondered if I even remembered how to rest anymore. The persistent chill, the constant feeling of being watched. These weren't conditions conducive to relaxation. Still, I did as ordered, taking a maglev train to my family's home in what used to be called the Pacific Northwest. The forest retreat had been in my family for generations, modernized over the years, but still retaining the rustic charm of real wood and stone in an age of synthetic materials. My parents were surprised, but pleased to see me. They knew I served on the Primordius, but had been told only that we'd been engaged in diplomatic missions following an incident at a Galactic Council facility. The civilian news feeds were carefully controlled, presenting humanity's sudden galactic dominance as the result of strategic negotiations rather than what amounted to an act of terrorism backed by the threat of more to come. I didn't correct their misconceptions. What would be the point? To tell them their son had died and been reconstructed? That death itself was stalking the corridors of human ships? That we might have triggered an apocalypse that would make the obsidian void look like a minor anomaly? Instead, I hiked in the ancient forest, slept in my childhood room, and pretended everything was normal. For brief moments, I almost believed it myself. Until the 5th night of my stay, when I woke to find the Reaper standing at the foot of my bed. It was more defined this time. The cloak of darkness, more distinctly fabric-like, the skeletal hand gripping the scythe, with visible fingers rather than amorphous shadow. The blue lights of its eyes seemed to have gained focus, examining me with what I could only interpret as clinical interest. "What do you want?" I whispered, surprised by my own boldness. The Reaper tilted its head slightly, an unervingly human gesture from something so patently inhuman. "Balance," it replied, its voice still bypassing my ears to resonate directly in my mind. "The natural order restored. By taking back those who've respawned." I asked, "By killing us permanently?" "Your understanding is limited by your perspective," the Reaper said. "I do not kill. I transition. I shepherd. I maintain the boundaries between states of existence. And our respawn technology interferes with that. It creates tears in the fabric. Through those tears, things observe. Things wait. Things that hunger." A chill ran through me that made the persistent cold-eyed felt since respawning seem like a summer breeze. "What things?" The Reaper raised its scythe slightly, and the darkness of its cloak seemed to deepen, expanding to fill more of the room. "Entities that exist in the spaces between life and death, between matter and energy, between what is and what can never be. They have been contained beyond the veil since the dawn of this reality. Your technology is releasing them, one soul fragment at a time." "And what do these entities want?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "To feed, to consume, to unmake." The Reaper's form began to fade, becoming less substantial. "They have tasted humanity now. They will not stop with just your species." As it disappeared entirely, its final words echoed in my mind. "The bill comes due for all, eventually. But some prices are too high even for me to collect." I didn't sleep again that night or the night after. When the 2-week leave ended, I returned to Geneva with dark circles under my eyes and a resolution forming in my mind. If High Command wouldn't listen to reason, perhaps there were other ways to address the crisis we'd created. I wasn't the only one who'd come to this conclusion. Lieutenant Commander Reeves contacted me the day after I returned, suggesting we meet at a small cafe in the old part of Geneva, one of the few places that weren't constantly monitored by Terran defense security systems. "I've been talking to others," he said without preamble once we were seated in a quiet corner. "People who've had multiple respawns, who've seen the entity more clearly than most. We're forming a group." "What kind of group?" I asked cautiously. "The kind that's going to do something about this situation before it's too late." Reeves's eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt. He lost weight since I'd last seen him. High Command is still pushing forward with respawn technology, still planning military operations that rely on it. They're ignoring the warnings, dismissing the evidence. "And what do you propose instead?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice further. "We're calling ourselves the Veil Guardians. Dramatic, I know, but it fits. Our goal is to expose the truth about respawn technology and force its decommissioning before the barrier collapses completely." Expose the truth? To whom? I challenged. The civilian population that's been fed propaganda about our diplomatic victories? The military brass who are drunk on the power this technology gives them? The alien species who are either surrendering to us or preparing for war? "To everyone," Reeves replied firmly. "We're gathering evidence, testimonies, sensor readings from respawn facilities, medical data on the declining success rates. One of our members works in Dr. Chen's lab. She's been copying research findings that High Command has been suppressing." I considered his words carefully. On one hand, what he was proposing amounted to treason during wartime. On the other, If what the Reaper had told me was true, the stakes went far beyond political considerations. "How many of you are there?" I asked. 37 so far, all military personnel who've undergone at least one respawn procedure. All of us have seen the entity. All of us have heard its warnings in one form or another. I thought about my own encounter with the Reaper, the warning about entities that hunger and unmake, and the declining barrier between realities. "Count me in," I said, surprising myself with the decisiveness of my response. "What's the plan?" Reeve allowed himself a small smile. "First, we gather more evidence and recruit others who've had similar experiences. Then we prepare a comprehensive data package, irrefutable proof that respawn technology is causing catastrophic damage to reality itself. Finally, we release it simultaneously to all channels: military command, civilian news networks, allied alien species, even our enemies. They'll try to discredit us," I pointed out. "Call us mentally unstable, victims of some kind of post-respawn psychosis. That's why the evidence needs to be irrefutable," Reeves countered, "and why we need as many witnesses as possible. And if they still refuse to listen, if they decide the military advantage outweighs the risk." Reeves's expression hardened. "Then we move to Plan B. We have members with access to key respawn facilities. If necessary, we can disable the technology ourselves. Sabotage." The word hung unspoken between us. Another form of treason, this one even more serious. "That's a last resort," he added, seeing my hesitation. "But we're prepared to do whatever it takes. The stakes are too high for half measures." Over the next 3 weeks, I worked with the Veil Guardians, gathering data and recording my own experiences with the Reaper. The entity seemed to be appearing with increasing frequency, not just to me, but to everyone who had undergone a respawn procedure. And its appearances were becoming more substantial, more defined, less like glimpses of something beyond reality, and more like a being manifesting fully in our world. Even more concerning were the new phenomena being reported around respawn facilities. Shadows moving independently of any light source. Equipment malfunctioning in specific patterns that, when analyzed, resembled language. Personnel experiencing lost time, entering a room and emerging hours later with no memory of what had transpired. Something was coming through the tiers in the veil, just as the Reaper had warned. Our opportunity came when Admiral Harkness called a closed-session briefing for high-ranking officers and key personnel involved in the respawn program. Thanks to Commander Blake, who had become increasingly concerned about the situation despite her initial dismissal of the risks, I was added to the attendee list as a witness to the Feldara incident with valuable insights. The briefing took place in a secure underground facility beneath Terran Defense Headquarters. 50 people were present: generals, admirals, scientists, and a handful of field officers like myself. Security was tight, with neural scanners at the entrance to detect any recording devices or unauthorized communications technology. Admiral Harkness opened the session with a grim assessment of the current situation. The respawn success rate has dropped to 67%, down from 98% 6 months ago. Entity encounters have increased by 340% in the same period. Spatial temporal anomalies around respawn facilities have become so common that we've had to establish dedicated containment teams. On the large display screen behind him, data scrolled showing the escalating crisis. Incident reports, medical statistics, sensor readings that made no sense according to known physics. Despite these challenges, Harkness continued, the strategic advantage provided by respawn technology remains significant. The Sifrixi Alliance has suffered major defeats in 3 systems, largely due to our troops' ability to sustain combat operations beyond what would normally be possible. A general I didn't recognize spoke up. Are we certain these phenomena are directly related to the respawn technology? Could they be the result of enemy countermeasures or unknown alien influence? Dr. Chun, who was present representing the Medical Research Division, answered. All evidence points to a causal relationship between respawn procedures and the increasing instability in what we're calling the life-death barrier. Each time a consciousness is transferred from the point of death back to a new physical form, the barrier is damaged slightly. These damages are cumulative and appear to be approaching a critical threshold. "And what happens when this threshold is reached?" asked another officer. Dr. Chun hesitated, glancing at Admiral Harkness, who nodded slightly. "Our models suggest a cascading failure of local reality structures," she said carefully. "Similar to what occurred in the region now known as the Obsidian Void, but potentially on a much larger scale, possibly encompassing the entire Sol system or beyond." Murmurs of alarm spread through the room. This was worse than even the Veil Guardians had suspected. "How long do we have?" someone asked. "At current progression rates, between 2 and 4 months, Dr. Chen replied. "However, the degradation isn't linear. As more breaches occur, the rate of deterioration accelerates." Admiral Harkness raised his hands for silence. "This is why we've convened today. We face a difficult decision. Maintain our military advantage in an ongoing interstellar conflict, or suspend the respawn program to prevent a potentially catastrophic outcome." This was my chance. I raised my hand, and to my surprise, Harkness acknowledged me immediately. "Sir, if I may," I began, standing to address the room. "I've had multiple encounters with the entity that first appeared at Feldara Station. In my most recent encounter, it specifically warned about entities coming through the tiers in the barrier, beings that exist in the space between life and death, that hunger and unmake. I believe we're seeing the first signs of these entities manifesting in our reality." The room fell silent. I had their attention. "I've also learned," I continued, "that similar warnings have been recorded in the ancient texts of multiple alien species, including the Talaxians and the Children of the Ancients. These texts describe a previous breach of the life-death barrier that resulted in the creation of the Obsidian Void." "And you can verify these claims?" a skeptical general asked. "The Veil Guardians can," I replied, deliberately using the name of our group. "We've been collecting testimonies, data, and historical records for the past 3 weeks. Everything points to the same conclusion. Respawn technology is tearing holes in reality itself, and something is coming through those holes." Admiral Harkness's expression was unreadable. "The Veil Guardians? You formed an unauthorized research group. We prefer to think of ourselves as concerned citizens acting in humanity's best interest," I said, bracing for the backlash. To my surprise, Commander Blake stood up. "I can corroborate much of what's been said. I've experienced entity encounters myself, and I've seen the data. The situation is dire, and time is running out." One by one, other officers in the room, members of the Veil Guardians who I hadn't even known were part of the group, stood and offered their own testimonies. By the time the last one had spoken, nearly a quarter of the people present were standing. Admiral Harkness surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on each person who had risen. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Well," he said, "it seems the decision may have already been made for us." From his uniform pocket, he withdrew a small device that looked similar to the switch Commander Blake had given me at Feldara Station. "I had hoped we might find another solution," Harkness continued. "A way to maintain the respawn program while mitigating its side effects. But your testimonies, combined with Dr. Chen's data, make it clear that we've reached a point of no return." He pressed a button on the device. For a moment, I tensed, fearing some kind of trap or attack. Instead, a holographic display appeared above the conference table, showing the status of every respawn facility on Earth and throughout human space. One by one, the indicators turned from green to red as systems shut down. Effective immediately, Harkness announced, "The respawn program is suspended indefinitely. All facilities are to cease operations. All research is to be secured for later analysis. And all personnel are to prepare for standard combat. Operations without respawn capabilities." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After weeks of clandestine meetings and data collection, after preparing ourselves for potential court-martials or worse, High Command was simply agreeing with us? "Sir," I ventured, "may I ask why you're not more surprised by our unauthorized activities?" Harkness's smile turned grim. "Because, soldier, I've seen the Reaper too. 3 times in the past week alone. The last time, it showed me what waits beyond the veil. His eyes took on a haunted look. No military advantage is worth that. Nothing is. A collective shudder went through the room. If even Admiral Harkness, one of the staunchest supporters of the Respawn program, had been convinced of the danger, the situation was truly dire. What do we tell the public? Someone asked. And our troops on the front lines? This will dramatically alter our strategic position. The truth, Harkness replied simply, as unbelievable as it may sound. We tell them that humanity pushed too far, too fast, and now we must pull back before we trigger something worse than defeat in war. As the meeting continued, discussing the logistics of the shutdown and the strategic realignments necessary, I found myself watching the shadows in the corners of the room. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed a familiar darkness and 2 points of blue light. But there was no sense of dread accompanying the sight, only a feeling that might almost have been approval. Perhaps death was satisfied with our decision. Or perhaps it was simply acknowledging that, for once, humanity had chosen wisdom over power. Either way, I knew the Respawn program suspension was only the beginning. The damage had already been done. The veil had been torn. The entities beyond had tasted our reality. The question now was whether we could repair the damage before something truly catastrophic emerged from the spaces between life and death. As I left the briefing room, I caught sight of Dr. Chun in the corridor. She motioned me aside. Your Veil Guardians did good work, she said quietly. But shutting down the Respawn program won't be enough. What do you mean? She glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. The Veil has already been significantly compromised. According to our latest measurements, it's continuing to thin even without new Respawn procedures. A cold weight settled in my stomach. So we've only delayed the inevitable? Not necessarily. We've been developing a theoretical framework for a repair procedure, a way to strengthen the barrier and seal the existing breaches. Ow! Dr. Chen's expression became grave. It would require the voluntary sacrifice of everyone who has undergone a Respawn procedure. I stared at her, processing the implications. Sacrifice? You mean death? Permanentes. She nodded slowly. When a consciousness is respawned, fragments remain behind in what we might call the between space. Those fragments act as anchors, holding tiers in the veil open.